Hello everyone, welcome to my channel and my inaugural video. In this first video, we will take a look at recent developments in education policies. The School District of Surrey in British Columbia, Canada recently announced that in the upcoming school year, a third of high schools within the district will implement a dual timetable system. Some start early and finish early, while others begin later and wrap up later. The rationale is that as the student population grows, this flexible scheduling can accommodate more students effectively. The plan is that by dividing the school day into 5 blocks rather than the traditional 4, the district expects to boost school capacity by 10 to 15%. But of course, not everyone's on board. Many parents think that it's a headache, especially for families juggling multiple after-school plans for their kids. This, of course, isn't just a Canadian thing, though. The similarities between Canada and America means that such parental oppositions are a North American phenomenon. Even after the learning loss of the pandemic, only around 20% of American parents support extending the school year or the school day. Common extracurriculars in North America include private lessons, tutoring, and sports. Not only have they become more popular over the years, but they all happen outside school facilities. Making matters worse, the relatively low population density of American suburbs and the lack of robust public transportation, which are of course different issues, means that most of the chauffeuring duties fall on the parents. Surveys have shown that most parents would place their children in extracurricular activities if public transportation were more accessible, which is just another way of saying that existing extracurricular activities rely almost entirely on parents and their availability to drive at 3 p.m. Many families have become accustomed to a school schedule that ends at 3 p.m. This tells us that what the parents are actually unhappy about is changing the end of school time to after 3 p.m. because this means changes to how they organize their child responsibilities. But while parents may have become accustomed to these schedules, many have pointed out that there's a glaring mismatch between school schedules and the traditional 8-hour workday. Many parents find themselves reducing their work hours or shelling out a small fortune on childcare just to juggle it all. But the conflict between work and school times isn't just a daily hassle, but it has become a significant economic cost. Lost earnings, reduced productivity, and missed opportunities are adding up, making this family-school dynamic rather unsustainable. Breaking it down even further, parents' objection to a longer school day, such as the case in Surrey, reflect 3 particulars of the North American education system. First, most students have after-school arrangements. Second, their arrangements often occur outside of and distant from school facilities, so that means they must leave school as soon as class ends. Lastly, parents are primarily responsible for supervising and chauffeuring for those activities. We will discuss the rise of after-school arrangements later in the video, but let us focus on the second and third realities that constitute this conflict. Now, these are actually 2 sides of the same coin. In the modern era, society generally recognizes 2 entities that are suitable for guardianship: the parents or the government. The separation of school and after-school activities means that as soon as the bell rings, childcare responsibilities are transferred from the government to the parents. But consider this. The 8-hour workday became a staple in American life way back in the early 1900s, and the structure of our school day wasn't set until later in the 1930s. But why didn't these systems align? In this video, we will dive into why this clash exists and why it has persisted for so long. To sum up, it is in essence a conflict between the family-school dynamic inherited from the 20th century and the rising educational demands of the 21st century. Let us rewind to the beginning of the modern education system in America, which developed hand-in-hand with work schedules, or to be more precise, the modern education system is a consequence of modern production. Until the 18th century, education was a luxury which only the class of the wealthy and powerful could afford for their children. For most of the population, little education was needed. The low-efficiency farming that sustained human civilization thousands of years required only limited observation of the patterns of weather and crop growth. Generally, this knowledge was passed down orally, and it became a form of common wisdom. All you needed for farming, really, was physical strength. If you could walk, you could work, which is why families were incentivized to have more children. But then, the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century changed the game. Suddenly, muscle power became less desirable to brain power. As machines transformed production, the need for skilled workers who could operate, maintain machinery, and communicate across departments skyrocketed. Early champions of public education argued that an educated worker was not only safer and more efficient, but also less likely to cause accidents or damage equipment. This shift sparked a surge in the demand for public education, right as America's industrial gear started turning faster. By the mid-1800s, the size of the industrial sector had been growing faster than the agricultural sector, and between 1850 and 1870, America's industrial output had doubled itself. Then, by century's end, there were more workers in industrial production than farming. Alongside this industrial boom, literacy rates and school enrollment surged. However, the school schedule that is prevalent today was not installed immediately, nor did child labor vanish quickly. The evolution was gradual, shaped over decades by productivity shifts and negotiation among various stakeholders. For much of history, children worked just as much as adults. Even into the early 1900s, children contributed significantly to family total income. School absence was high, and even many of those who did show up requested to leave early so they can work part-day. Under these realities, school hours expanded gradually against children working hours. 2/3 of children who worked in agriculture attended school at the same time, and in rural America, school actually began at 9 a.m. so that children could complete their morning chores before school. Now, urban children often worked in factories, which of course demanded longer working hours than farms. So these children often worked before and after school, sometimes during school hours, and generally late into the night. In those days, families often faced a tough choice: the immediate financial contribution of a working child versus the potential long-term benefits of education. They would compare the money that a child could earn if they dropped out with the money that it could earn in the future with a high school diploma, keeping in mind that an impatient parent or child will highly discount future earnings. But it wasn't just the parents. Working children themselves thought it was more productive to work instead. Children even actively participated in union activity in the late 1900s, both on their own and with adults. And it wasn't uncommon. Just like adult workers, they protested declining wages and resorted to violence when their demands were not met. Of course, child labor was not the only factor that shaped school hours. Today, we are used to being constantly stimulated by numbers, graphics, and abstract thoughts. But until the industrial age, life rarely presented mental and cognitive challenges. When schools imposed several hours of academic work each day and multiple days a week, it sparked health concerns from both parents and medical professionals. Education practitioners noticed as early as the 1870s that students showed signs of fatigue after just 3 hours of instruction. But of course, 3 hours of school alone is not enough. Balancing educational needs with these physical limits led to the optimal schedule of 3 hours of morning classes, a lunch break, and then 3 more hours in the afternoon. You see, the promise of education back then wasn't as clear-cut as it is today. The reality was that education, even by the early 1900s, did not offer as much opportunities as it does today, as most factory work at the time remained a largely physical, not a mental, activity. The pace of the diffusion of technology and industrial upgrading was not as rapid as to afford every student predictable and more attractive careers than they otherwise would. Some officials at the time even argued that child labor helped prevent child delinquency and promote hardworking virtues. The modern belief that education could fundamentally change a person's life trajectory only took hold later in the 20th century. By the 1930s, the tide of education had truly turned. The explosion of industrial production had reshaped American life, tipping the scales in favor of education over child labor. As families started to see the real value of schooling, the notion of children toiling in factories became increasingly distasteful. Now, on top of that, the Great Depression exacerbated competition for jobs, pushing adults and children into the same labor pool. This then incentivized more adults to oppose child labor. So this shift wasn't just about ethics, it was more about economics. The evolving industry needed a smarter workforce. As management and clerical roles grew, the demand for an educated workforce became undeniable, pushing business leaders and policymakers. By the 1930s, enrollment rates for elementary education had soared past 80%. And it wasn't until then that compulsory education laws and anti-child labor laws, which had been introduced for decades, finally became substantial. The 1930s marked a new era in American education and the true beginning of childhood as we know it today. Freed from the expectation to work, America's children immersed themselves in the freedom of childhood under the supervision of their mother. In many middle-class families, the mother was a constant presence. She was there when her children returned from schools with meals ready and homes tidy. She was the first contact during any school emergencies, and she was always there during school vacation and holidays. Beyond just care, she also managed children's extracurricular activities, creating a seamless blend of school life and home life with no overlap into working hours. This comfortable equilibrium lasted for a few decades until the 1970s, when seismic shifts in American society began to challenge this established equilibrium. The first major disruptor was the dramatic rise in women's employment, a direct outcome of the feminist movements of the 1960s and 1970s. In 1950, only about 35% of women worked outside the home. This figure crept up to 30% in 1960, 52% by 1980, and reached 60% by the year 2000. Even more telling is a surge in employment among mothers with school-age children, from 54.9% in 1975 to 77.5% in 2004. The landscape of American families was also transforming. Between 1940 and 1989, the percentage of young children living in dual-earner families increased sevenfold, from 5% to 38%. And today, that number is around 70%. As you can imagine, the fabrics of after-school care was stretched dangerously thin as more mothers joined the workforce. In 1940, most young children had at least one parent at home full-time. By 1989, this was true for less than half. The immediate fallout was a gaping void in supervision during the critical hours of 3 to 6 p.m. While teenagers could somewhat fend for themselves, giving rise to the era of latchkey kids, the safety of younger children became a pressing concern, especially as the perception of crime rose between the 60s and the 90s. This surge in working women and heightened safety concerns spurred the first major childcare crisis in America, which then led to a surge of childcare centers. Soon, a new form of balance had been struck between childcare centers, relative care, grandparents' care, sibling care, self-care, and some mothers staying home. This patchwork solution sustained American families for a few decades. However, since the turn of the millennium, the established family-school dynamic was once again impacted by the rising expectations of education and child development. Parents today don't just want their kids to be safe after school, but they want them engaged in meaningful, productive activities. This leads us back to the point mentioned in the beginning of the video about the rise of after-school arrangements. There are two main types of arrangements: childcare, which focuses on supervision and safety, and extracurricular activities like sports and tutoring, designed to enhance children's interests and abilities. Both types of arrangements are increasingly viewed as crucial investments in children's future. This trend isn't just a whim of ambitious parents, it's a logical outcome of our industrial urban society. As living standards rise, parents naturally expect their children to attain, if not surpass, their own levels of wealth and comfort. The advancements in labor specialization and technology have created ample opportunities to climb the social ladder. But they also demand higher levels of skill and education. The result is longer educational tracks that delay entry into the workforce, which raises the opportunity cost of child rearing, and consequently, many families opted to have fewer children but invest more heavily in each one, emphasizing quality over quantity. Beyond just shifting from quantity to quality, the price of achieving quality in child development has also soared. The new rounds of industrial revolution since the 2000s, from the internet, microchips to AI, continuously impact and challenge traditional industries. And those aiming to participate and benefit from these technological advancements must commit to lifelong learning. Beyond that, the increasing recognition of psychological and mental health as critical components of overall well-being has further escalated the cost of raising children. In other words, both the demand for human capital and the emotional and economic costs of developing such capital have dramatically increased. This ultimately means that parent expectations for how children spend their time after school have changed. The once leisurely afternoons are now seen as prime opportunities for skill enhancement. They insist that the hours after school be filled not only with safety, but also with learning and productivity. Returning to the controversy over the Surrey School District's recent scheduling changes, it is fundamentally a clash between the working parents and escalating educational expectations. In our current setup, where the state is relieved of their duties at 3 p.m., parents face a tough zero-sum game. More time at work means less time for childcare, and vice versa. Some parents, particularly mothers, have chosen to step back from their careers to ensure their children receive adequate education. This decision has contributed to a stagnation over the last 3 decades of women employment rates in America. As a society, however, this trade-off is not desirable. Both the employment of women and children's educational aspirations are vital to our collective productivity. To sacrifice one for the other is akin to purchasing a laptop to ensure that your bed sits flat. Both are important, but the issue is better resolved by other means. Luckily, the division of labor in the modern society allows specialized people to do specialized things. The efficiency of the modern society comes precisely from this cooperation. The most sensible solution, then, might be to expand the school day. This will allow professional educators to handle educational enrichment during what are currently after-school hours, freeing parents from having to choose between their careers and their children's developmental needs. But it is important to clarify that extending the school day beyond 3 p.m. doesn't necessarily mean more instructional hours. The objective of these additional hours should be twofold. Firstly, to relieve parents of their childcare and chauffeuring duties and to facilitate academic and extracurricular development. This means that the extended time can be used in a few ways. The first is, of course, extra tutoring or instructional hours. Now, for families unable to access additional educational resources, this time could provide essential tutoring services, helping to bridge the educational gap. Second, if students only want to hang out, then that's fine. Then school facilities can collaborate with community centers to provide students a safe space to socialize. The school can set up some games, movies, and allow students to socialize under limited supervision. Lastly, schools to utilize their facilities to host various clubs or interest groups and sports activities. Popular after-school programs like dance classes, music lessons, and private tutoring could also be incorporated directly into the school setting. Instead of parents commuting to different locations for these activities, schools could collaborate with local instructors and tutors to bring these classes on site. Ultimately, the aim is for schools to maximize their support for students' extracurricular interests. Let us do some basic math here to see the economic costs and benefits of extending the school day. Now, fulfilling these two goals require 2 investments. The most obvious is, of course, investments in existing school infrastructure, such as building maintenance, materials, and staff wages. Now, back in 2014, numerous school districts across America attempted to extend the school day. And they found that the cost per student per hour ranges between $4 and $7 in 2024 money. Now, keep in mind, most schools use this money for instructional hours, which is, of course, the costliest. If the extended time goes to student socialization instead, then the cost of supervision will be undoubtedly cheaper. Secondly, investments in school or public transportation around 3 p.m. are needed as well. Current school facilities may not be sufficient to satisfy comprehensive after-school programs. So the public school system can collaborate with community centers or even private venues such as shopping malls to offer a more exciting program. This means that school buses are needed. Back in 2019, public school buses across America cost every student that it transported $1,152, or about $6.4 per student per day. The potential cost of school buses is hard to estimate. On one hand, to drive students from schools to community centers or sports games, then back home, is indeed a lot more work. But on the other hand, not every student will use the service, and more parents will be available to pick their children up after work. Now, for the sake of argument, let's assume that extending the school day increases school bus cost to $10 per student per day. So, the total additional cost for extending the school day for 2.5 hours is around $27 per student per day. Now, let us look at the economic benefits of these investments. The most obvious is that parents are free to return to work. Currently, over half of all students in America are driven to and from school. Now, the average commute time to and from school by car is almost 16 minutes. But this does not include the time waiting in pickup lines. This means that parents must leave work by around 2:30 p.m., and by the time parents return home with their children, it is unlikely that parents can return to work. The 2022 family median income was $91,000, or just under $99,000 in today's money. Assuming that both parents earn equally, an average American worked 1,811 hours in 2022,
the opportunity cost of picking up children from school is around 27 today's dollars. Not only so, this arrangement often limits parents, and again, especially mothers, to part-time work.
This not only reduces their earnings, but severely limits their career growth in the long term. The second economic benefit of extending the school day is the reduction in social and economic costs of juvenile delinquency.
Violent crime and gang crimes committed by youth during school days peak between 3 and 4 p.m. Now, in 2023, juvenile crime cost the state of Colorado $3.31 billion, or around $566 per resident of Colorado. And keep in mind, these are the numbers of an economically above average state. Not only does Colorado's economic performance rank near the top 10 among the U.S. states, but it also already spends considerably less on youth incarceration than most states. Extending the school day can not only extend supervision, but also offer youth something more productive to do than crime. Lastly, extending the school day can save the money that current parents of younger children pay out of pocket for after-school childcare. Now, there's a severe lack of childcare services in America, but for the parents who are fortunate enough to pay for these services, a national survey shows that parents pay on average $17.75 per hour for after-school care. Extending the school day can alleviate these out-of-pocket expenses significantly. But it must be noted that the economic savings listed here are only measurable and tangible benefits. The most significant benefit, of course, is the improvements in education and development opportunities for all children.
Unsurprisingly, investments in education are almost always economically worthwhile. But before I conclude, I think it's instructive to place North America's educational system, particularly the end of school times, within a broader historical context by comparing it with other developed nations. This should reveal to us how different societies manage educational responsibilities and parents' work schedules.
In most European countries, school ends at or around 3 p.m. Now, this reflects a similar division of child-rearing responsibilities. Governments fulfill their duty until 3 p.m., after which parents take over. In the UK, for example, it is common for parents to rely on their parents to provide childcare until they return from work.
Of all developed countries, 2 feature different end-of-school times.
The first is Japan. Although officially the instructional day ends at 3:30 p.m., it is expected that most students should attend club activities at their school for at least 2 hours, and many then attend cram school until later evening. The tradition of activities after 3 p.m. has been in place since Imperial Japan of the early 20th century.
Interestingly, Japan is not only the only major developed country to offer a longer school day, but Japan is also the first, and so far the most successful, late industrialized country. From a macro perspective, the development path of late industrialized countries is to catch up to known production models, known technological paths, known research and development methods, and known social organization models, while the development path of early industrialized country feature more uncertainty and tension.
The developmental direction of science at the forefront is determined by trial and error and competition among scientists. Similarly, the developmental direction of the best social organization model is derived from the competition between social camps with different interests and positions.
Thus, late industrialized countries are more likely to sacrifice social welfare for efficiency, while early industrialized countries are more likely to develop an equilibrium between social welfare and productivity. Because education is one of the most important catalysts to development, a country's attitude towards development is often reflected in its education policy, and vice versa. Relative to Western Europe and America, both Prussia of the early 1800s and Japan of the late 1800s were less industrialized, but they share 3 significant similarities in education policies.
First, they immediately established a centralized education authority. Second, they actively enforced attendance and reached a high enrollment rate well ahead of Western Europe and America. Lastly, relative to their GDP per capita, they provided their citizens significantly more educational resources.
But although late industrialized states may invest more in education, they are less likely to provide other social welfare.
When America and Europe implemented the 8-hour workday around 1920, workers in Japan consistently worked 12 hours a day, and the annual hours worked in Japan only matched that of America after the year 2000.
This intense focus on education and long working hours necessitated a shift in parental responsibilities, leading to a government taking more active role in childcare during working hours. This is precisely why almost all successful late industrialized countries including Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, and Singapore, have implemented an education system that entirely frees the parents from childcare responsibilities during work hours. The second developed country that features a different end of school time is today's Germany, where prevailing traditional half-day school model ends at 1:30 p.m.
If we compare Germany, America, and Japan on a scale that describes how the responsibility of childcare is divided between the government and the family, then Japan will be on the very right, as governments provide childcare until after 5 p.m., America in the middle, and Germany on the left. At 1:30 p.m., students are sent home for lunch, and mothers are expected to be home to take care of their children for the rest of the day.
For many reasons, the German society remains rather conservative, and this arrangement underscores a family-centric society where the state minimizes its role in child development, viewing it as a responsibility that belongs primarily to the family.
Article 6 of the German Basic Constitutional Law posits the protection of marriage and family, and it codifies childcare as a natural right and the highest duty of parents. Social policies also promote the traditional gender roles where the wife stays home and the husband works full-time. The health and pension benefits of the housewife, for example, is provided for by her husband's entitlements, and the highest saving from married couples tax splitting is achieved when one spouse has a high income and the other one is not working at all. The result is that while women's employment rate in Germany is high, women in Germany are 1.5 times more likely to work a part-time job compared to the OECD average.
Traditionally, the industrial might of Germany in traditional sectors, such as automotive, machinery, and chemical, has sustained Germany's position as one of the strongest economies. This has allowed Germany to afford the maintenance of a more conservative, albeit less productive, family-centric society.
However, as Germany falls behind in the new waves of industrial revolution that began in the 90s, Germany's global competitiveness has decreased and domestic calls for a transition into a full-day school system are rising.
Like Germany, America's advantages in technology and production are the fundamental reasons why a relatively more family-centric society persisted for decades.
America today remains the most powerful economy and the most significant source of innovation and development.
If every corner of American society can benefit from the growth in these sectors, then America can well afford to maintain a relatively more traditional family-centric society, where childcare after 3 p.m. remains within the rights of the family. And of course, such an arrangement is perfectly desirable. After all, it allows more family bonding time and puts less academic stress on children. Ending school at 3 p.m. is of course great, but only if it is economically sustainable.
America today not only faces greater global competition, particularly from late industrialized countries like China, but domestic wealth inequality also runs high. America's innovative and productive sectors involve only a fraction of the population, and those outside are less likely to enjoy the economic benefits. The advancements in artificial intelligence poses a threat not only to China, but also to the average American worker. For many mothers, the lack of affordable after-school care has already forced a reduction in employment, perpetuating a cycle where poverty breeds further poverty.
Particularly for those living in America, we must ask, where should America stand on a spectrum between a government-led and a family-centric approach to childcare and education? And most importantly, whether or not we can afford to have such a system. Of course, education reforms, including changes to school schedules, are challenging